Thank you for having me here. It's really great to be here, and I actually wish I had caught even more of the discussions you were just having. I think you've clearly been spending a lot of time, even just at this event, on a lot of the things that I care about and some of the things that I'll touch on. I've actually worked with a lot of the companies in the space that I think Linda was mentioning, and even before I was at Yahoo, and there's just so many dimensions and different kinds of entities now that are really in the space that traditionally was owned by news organizations and classic reporting. So I think we were kicking around and came up with some question like this, and the only way to answer it, I think, is to cheat and talk about what's going on now, but you can clearly see, I think, the seeds of what I expect, and I think a lot of people I know expect, will be trends and activities that will be much more dominant over the next 5 years, and I think the journalists will play a big part in a number of pursuits that are not thought of as classic journalism, and working with corporations on content is one of them. A lot of these things may sound scary, but really there's a diversity of activity out there, and there is a way to find some good and usefulness and public good in a lot of what's going on. And so one thing I thought I would, I'm really offering just a few very high-level things as maybe a jumping off point for discussion, and then absolutely am willing to talk about anything that anybody's curious about. Yahoo is a very interesting place to be now. I've been here 2 years. I've got a new CEO, Marissa Mayer, who was pivotal at Google in many things, including Google News and Google Finance. And it's been very interesting working with her and new people at Yahoo who have the various perspectives involved in creating those products. One of the things that we're really working on at Yahoo now is what the human factor really means. And something that's been enlightening in working with her is she's been dealing with algorithms. She has an advanced degree in artificial intelligence from Stanford. But people who grew up in the Google culture also, I think, have been fascinated by the size and breadth of Yahoo, which grew up as a very old-fashioned kind of portal. It was Jerry and David's Guide with little cool sunglasses next to certain pics, if anybody remembers back that far. And David Philo, one of the founders, is still with the company, and he's at all the big meetings, and the spirit of the two guys doing this thing is still there. And I think Marissa's done an amazing job of bringing that spirit back and bringing on new people. What's amazing, though, to me, if you look at even just any high-level stat on news, we know news is moving to and has moved in large part to digital. I don't have anything comparing traditional media here, but generally the numbers are bigger on digital than any other platform. And I have the privilege of being involved in Yahoo News, which, if you look at these, has this scale advantage over traditional news brands. It has advantages and disadvantages. It really started with a deal with Reuters, I think, in 1994, to put the Reuters wires on this Yahoo guide. And the rest is history. Yahoo has been, in Yahoo News, have really been the #1 places to get Reuters, AP, other sources. We have a newspaper consortium that's primarily commercial, but we have partnerships with almost every news organization that there is. The disadvantage, certainly for someone like me, is what are we doing as a news organization? What do journalists do at Yahoo? We've always had some, but it really started as about 7 people managing and presenting the wire feeds and giving people choice. And so Yahoo's invested in other areas historically, like Yahoo Sports, where we have investigative and enterprise journalists who break news all the time. I've had the privilege of starting to do that in the last couple of years, where we had some blogs. We now have a White House correspondent, Olivier Knox, who came from AFP, who is on, we go to the White House correspondence dinners. But really, we're just at the point now in investing, I think, in traditional journalism at a time where we have a tech CEO who is really doubling down on new products. And so one of the things that I think I'm working on and trying to figure out with partners in newsrooms across the country and around the world is, where do we go with this scale advantage? How do we work with the rest of the organizations on this list? And what's going on with the platforms like Twitter and the quasi-platform social organizations like Reddit and the completely new players like Buzzfeed. How do we engage? So this isn't really the exact kind of list you would think of as news and media players, and yet they're a fact of life right now. So where's all this going in the next 5 years as some of these players get stronger and stronger? And what happens as those that rely on traditional organizations for their content become the dominant players in some ways? Think about this. BuzzFeed mines Reddit. They all promote stories from all these other news organizations, and it all goes back to the basic production that a lot of you guys have been interested in for years. And so I thought just briefly, just here, again, maybe nothing new in some ways, but it's fairly obvious that anybody can be a news player now, and per the discussion on, I'll come back to this, corporations being involved. At LinkedIn, social platforms are the dominant distributor of content right now. And actually, just to go back to this, Yahoo News has this breadth. It comes from people using Yahoo Mail, using Yahoo as a portal, going direct to Yahoo News. It also comes from Yahoo News being the #2 source of shared content on Facebook, Yahoo and Yahoo News. YouTube is far and away the #1. But if there's a story by a news organization or by the AAP, it probably was hosted on Yahoo News and distributed on Facebook. And going back to this, though, you have these social platforms that are now the way that most people are reached, becoming media entities in their own right. So LinkedIn launched first LinkedIn Today, which was a social feed on top of LinkedIn. It's a primary way that I actually consume stories every day because it's a good socially relevant feed. It's more relevant to me personally than a Facebook feed because I have a lot of people in journalism and business that curate the stuff, and it actually works for me. Then they hired Daniel Roth from Fortune and started LinkedIn Influencers, and they have much greater ambitions to be a media company. They bought Pulse, the newsreader, and so you can imagine where this is going. They don't really need anybody else to be a media company now. They need partnerships, but increasingly they reach out direct to news players themselves, to other people that create content, and they have every piece of what constitutes a seat at the table in news and are going deeper. The other long-term and obvious thing is that newsmakers go direct via Twitter, via any platform. They don't need news organizations. I don't think the White House is at the point where whitehouse.gov replaces the press conferences yet, but everything Snowden and going around, I think Glenn Greenwald functioned in a way almost as a social platform. You could argue back and forth. At the same time, simple things like Elon Musk disagrees with John Broder's review of the Tesla in the New York Times, and knowing Elon Musk, he goes direct in a sustained way, and he says that his only regret is that he didn't offer the rebuttal to the rebuttal to the rebuttal. He finally got tired. So this is a norm now. And a couple other things, though, again, that I think are worth, and I just jumping into slightly more. So everybody knows about Nate Silver, 538. There was a whole bidding war to get him to go partner with a major media organization, and he went to the New York Times, and the rest is history. But my point in bringing this up is not that, unlike Tom Friedman, Nate Silver didn't go to the New York Times to get famous and get famous. Nate Silver went to the New York Times and helped the New York Times become much more dominant in the political discussion in the election cycle, and this is the New York Times. And so, a little close to the heart in that I actually just hired Nate's editor, Megan Lieberman, yesterday to be the new editor-in-chief of Yahoo News, I think with the promise of expanding and doing lots of new interesting things. And I like that quote from New York Magazine that Jill Abramson, the editor of the New York Times, and others really tried to keep Nate, and what emerged from this is that Nate's a free agent. The New York Times needs Nate Silver more than Nate needs the New York Times. Tom Friedman was the opposite case. He's great and did big things, but he was born and raised on that New York Times platform. So how many more Nate Silvers are in the midst? And anybody can be a Nate Silver, and it will be very interesting to see the symbiosis between these emerging bloggers and others who join with traditional media brands and others that don't even need them to get this kind of status simply by virtue of their own performance. And I was listening closely when Linda was speaking because this is something I've been paying attention to for a long time. It's the idea of businesses going direct, and there is a somewhat flourishing business, I think, of employing journalists and others to create content and go direct to the public. I don't personally see a lot of examples of companies end running. I mean, there are a lot of examples of PR where companies will speak directly to their following and audiences. But there's some interesting things closer to the heart of news operations. There's a company some people may know called NewsCred, a startup that is syndicating news content from the AP and from newspapers and everywhere else to companies to run their own websites so that you can go there and get content that their customers are interested in. And it's exactly the case with Whole Foods. This is a case where NewsCred has journalists employed to run something like a newsroom for AIG, the insurance company. And why do they do it? And now I'm repeating what you said. It's not about insurance. It's content these customers are interested in. And I think the one thing I might add to that discussion is, does this work or not? And I think the ambition of companies who do this well is there's a trust factor. If you put out spun news or curate spun news, eventually one would think that your customers will not really think it's a very good source of news. But if you do a very good job of coming up with relevant content, and you have people come back and build a trust relationship with you as a company, so lifestyle advice or health advice from Whole Foods, that's an incredibly high bar. If you do it successfully, you've earned a place in the customer's heart, and they actually believe that you're a good source of healthcare information. The pitfalls of that that's a Matthew Ingram quote, you still don't know whom to trust. So it puts the burden on the customer, the reader, the user to make that judgment, and it's very hard to get in between those two. And that's where we are. So it'll be interesting to see, again, how do some of these corporations with public interest issues, defense contractors, others, what happens as they go direct, and this becomes a lot more controversial than simply news you might want to know that AIG happens to bring to you. And finally, the last point on all these entities being highly dependent on social platforms that they don't necessarily control in every way. It may not be the top of the list, but again, even this stat, people post news articles. So the ecosystem, the entire one we're talking about, still does come back to news, and most of it written actually by news organizations, not just tweets, not just Facebook posts. Most of those things, and this is a little old hat at this point, are based on content that somebody was probably paid to create and probably in a news context. I wanted to mention something about Buzzfeed, not to say yet another thing about Buzzfeed, but there's a dynamic that's at work that's really interesting if you're competing with Buzzfeed, as I feel that I am. I don't have a partnership with Buzzfeed. We could. But interestingly, I see an entity like Yahoo or Yahoo News as moving into the same competitive space as an entity like Buzzfeed. And the reason why is not that they have reporters, and I'd like to have more reporters, and I think we'll have more. It's how they play in this ecosystem. Buzzfeed has great packaging genius, and Jonah Peretti, for those who don't know, was one of the foundational people in Huffington Post. I work with Jay Singh now, who was the managing editor there at the time. But Buzzfeed, there's a lot to Buzzfeed that isn't about having 6 political reporters, amazing packaging, and interviews with Anthony Weiner over beers, which they just have an absolute genius for putting themselves at the center of conversation. But a lot of the other part, as people know, is listicles and cat gifts and things like that. What's more interesting here, though, is when you get into the news cycle. So what I tend to see from Buzzfeed is not necessarily something written by one of their political reporters, although they write perfectly fine stuff. It's how they play in a news moment. So in this case, there was a somewhat well-known interview on Fox News with Reza Aslan, who is a scholar who happens to be Muslim and wrote a book on the historical Jesus. The Fox anchor said, "How are you qualified to do that? You're a Muslim." And interestingly, all hell didn't break loose literally at that moment. It went Politico, it was on Fox, Politico posted it. A day later, Andrew Kaczynski at BuzzFeed posts it, and BuzzFeed so better leveraged this and spun it out into the ecosystem, that's where the spike occurred, and most of the traffic on this issue and the attention went to Buzzfeed. And so that's how they play. Similarly, they will mine interesting things on Reddit, which is a great source of things. The Reddit front page is a lot harder to discern than other areas of Reddit, at least in my experience, when you know what you're looking for and you find lots of interesting things that are not in general circulation. And so all this brings me to something that is front and center for what we're working on at Yahoo, and others are too. It isn't really enough. The old Yahoo model is to partner with the AP and partner with news organizations, repackage, do a little original content, and then run it. That is not fast enough for the world that we live in now. What's really, I think the real genius of BuzzFeed, and there are plenty of other players, is that they go and mine the full ecosystem deeply, and they find interesting things and they surface them. That's what they do. No one has really nailed, I think, yet doing that on issues of the highest public interest in real time in hard news. It happens, it's very chaotic. A great case this year was obviously the Boston Marathon bombings, when Reddit was not well trusted because the suspects were misidentified, et cetera. So you can't beat Twitter for speed, but you can beat Twitter for trust, and sometimes it really hits and sometimes it really misses. So what do we all do as journalists in a world where someone's going to hear about it on Twitter before you do anything? They just are going to, whether it's right or wrong. And there's a really great set of emerging models on this. And this is one pilot we have internally at Yahoo, playing with a number of people inside and outside, where we're looking at all the full social feeds. And this isn't simply how many tweets something has. This is looking for things that are not top trending terms. This is looking for things where we, as journalists, run certain queries. We look for certain areas where news tends to spike. And when we see a confluence of certain terms come together, there could be almost no traffic on it. There could be no attention to it. But we see that something unusual is happening, and then we need a journalist who's with high social aptitude and reporting chops to jump in and see if this thing is really news. And it may get out on Twitter, but a lot of these cases they won't. So that's just a mock-up, but you would see little things like exclamation points. Here is a hypothetical that we looked at after the fact. This was not the biggest, this was the recent, a couple of months ago, I think, plane crash in San Francisco airport. It was was it a crash? It was a hard landing, I think. It was hard for people to tell how serious it was. There was another incident in Alaska which actually had more fatalities than this, but this got a lot of attention for a lot of reasons. The reason I bring this up is that the way this played through media and the Twitterverse and traditional news organizations was really, really interesting. The crash happened at, I think, at 11:26 a.m. The incident happened. A lot of people, certainly people in technology and media business, heard about it because David Yoon, who used to be at Google and now is a senior executive at Samsung running media, was on the plane, and he actually posted a picture to via social platform. I'm remembering it wasn't Twitter, and it wasn't Pinterest, it was the other. But a lot of people followed it, including Brian Stelter at the New York Times, who jumped on it and ran with it. But if you look at these two tweets on the left, there are two tweets in Spanish from others who witnessed it. And if someone were tracking SFO, plane crashes, and other things in all languages, you would have seen a spike of activity somewhat earlier and would have been in a position to pursue either eyewitness reporting, phone, something else, looking at more social media. So this is simply on the basis of speed and verifying facts. And it would give you about a half an hour earlier in the news cycle to jump on something before it went around through the traditional routes. There are a lot of pitfalls in this, but it's an accelerated cycle where if you don't do this in news organization mode, you'll just have the tweets. So is there a role for journalists to jump into this cycle and start verifying and having the first trusted tweet and then the first trusted publication? Getting to things of much broader and deeper consequence, one startup that some of you may be familiar with is Storyful, based in Ireland. And they've had a lot of attention in the last couple of weeks. We've worked pretty deeply with them. And they have a great model that combines news experience and algorithms and publishing technology. And generally what they do is similarly run persistent queries against topics that their experienced journalists know to look for. You can run algorithms and you can look for everything everywhere, but you'll never find all this stuff. There is no, top trending terms will not surface breaking news like this. In this case, this happened to be the day that John Kerry was, I think, testifying later and said, all hell just broke loose on social media. He actually said on the social media, so it was a little, but the first reports of this, and again, the story's been obviously very hazy, really happened in social media to the point where the Secretary of State is referencing these reports. And there's another, a disturbing photo there is really, if you looked at, there's a YouTube page that comes from that listed all the primary source video that Kerry was referring to, and it was posted on YouTube and some other platforms first. It did not go through a reporting cycle beyond that. It was not easily accessible at first until people discovered it, talked about it, and then people started posting more. But if you look at this as a workflow, you have outfits like Storyful, and there are others that are constantly looking and querying. They have a project called Open Newsroom. They're obviously persistently following the Syria story and looking for things that surface. And to me, what differentiates them is that they have a sourcing workflow. So they are able to, they have contacts on the ground, they have lots of relationships via social platforms, and if there is something posted on YouTube or posted somewhere else or sent around, they don't just sit there and scratch their heads and decide whether it's true, real, faked. They have great journalists. There's a guy named David Clinch, who's their editor, who was editor at CNN International, and others who've been in these theaters of war. They actually have contacts in the field who are functioning as social correspondents. They have the ability to go to the person that created or shot the video, even if they're it's a one-time thing for them, and they can verify and compare it to other information. Do the items, does the backdrop match other backdrops in that area? Is the person who gave this to us someone who has given us material before? Do they have any relationship with someone we know? And so they'll make decisions in the thick of things, but they will be more informed decisions than someone simply finding it on YouTube, and you will not find most of this stuff on the front page of YouTube. And actually, when you do, it's probably because an organization like Storyful has verified it, repackaged it, and reposted it. So we think that we have a lot we can contribute on social sourcing with the scale of Yahoo News to work with partners, work with startups like Storyful, and do this ourselves, and constantly look at what happens before we receive a wire story from the AP. The difference, and I think an advantage for an outfit like Yahoo News, is that because we have multiple sources, we may take a first-hand clip of what's going on in Syria, pair it with an original story or with an AP story, and give the users a full package with multiple perspectives and more information. And that's the kind of thing that could be shared, whereas Buzzfeed may not have the resources to do that, or they may. And in the future, outfits like Buzzfeed certainly will have more. So again, I mean, very high level and very general. Is a lot of depth behind all of these things, and I think the things that you all were talking about as I came in were fascinating and things that I have a big passion for as well. But generally, if you think about in the next 5 or so years, what all kinds of things we haven't imagined will happen, but certainly things that I expect to be part of that playing field, those things are here, that everybody has to play with social platforms with scale. Being a platform or a content provider, the distinction is blurred, but at the end of the day, very few news brands will be able to survive without a relationship of some kind or use of a platform. I have a relationship with ABC News that is non-exclusive, but essentially allows Yahoo's scale to help them have a bigger return by investing time from their reporters and correspondents. Second, that free agents is a trend that's here to stay, and it will be interesting to see how important free agents are to preserving brands like the New York Times. Will it become a collection of free agents. ESPN has made these very interesting moves where they now have Nate Silver. They had a precursor with Bill Simmons, who really came out of a really interesting grassroots background, and he has Grantland, his own world. Nate has a world now. Other people will build these worlds for people with their own staffs of reporters who will be curating and reporting, and that's just a really, really interesting trend. These are now news brands. I don't think people will distinguish at some point CNN from one of those entities. But finally, not any one of these entities is taking global responsibility for verification and truth. They have brands, they have positions. Some are and will build trust because of the quality of their reporting and being first. Some will suffer, as Reddit did around the Boston bombings. But the experience and skill set from news organizations and people with journalistic training is incredibly valuable in a tech-driven social universe like this. And there is a lot of white space, as they say, out there for grassroots startups and bigger news organizations to emerge and work together and create really the equivalent of a better wire feed that's vital and that becomes the foundation for all these publishers. And that's something that I think no one has really, really accomplished yet, and it's something that I certainly hope to work on and do at Yahoo. And so that's what I wanted to share. I'm happy to take questions about anything at all, or help continue the discussions you guys have had.
Hey, Rob, how much do you guys think about personalization of the news now, and what role do you see that playing in the future?
An incredible amount. You know, I mentioned Yahoo a lot, but I specifically didn't come here to stump for Yahoo corporate other than passion projects and news. But a core direction for the company as a product company at the end of the day is personalization. And so if you look at Yahoo now versus, I don't know, a few months ago, there is a stream model on Yahoo News and the Yahoo front page, and the other properties are going to be emulating that. And I think it's a very basic start, but the foundation of Yahoo now as a product company is personal and mobile. So it raises all the filter bubble questions. I think our ambition and Marissa Meyer's ambition is to do it better than anyone else. We have this sea of content and partnerships and users to work with. But if you look right now, you will see a stream of content coming by, and it is personalizable, and more it will reflect a combination of editorial curation at the top of the page and in streams that we produce and you can subscribe to. And it will also create a hyper-personalized stream that you can just get.
Well, let me just jump. Go to your notion there, number 4, the verification, voice, and habit. You have habit. I mean, people are going to Yahoo News a lot, more than probably as large and big a habit as any newspaper organization in the world. So would you talk a little bit about the future of the journalistic role within Yahoo? Are you looking at folks who can verify and provide a voice for through the social media? I mean, is that a job description that Yahoo is going to have?
Yes, it actually is. And there are a couple of, I'd say, more than two, but two groups I'll talk about that I think are journal reporter pods. One is that I think we're very ambitious to do much more with breaking news, and breaking news now has to be a lot more, again, than taking third-party content, getting on the phone or doing shoe leather. It has to be parsing these social sources, so we'll be doing that and packaging that pretty effectively. And the second piece is we're going to be doing much more traditional enterprise journalism. And there are some analogies for why that makes economic sense as well as provides some public good. One analogy is Netflix and House of Cards. Why is Netflix, which was offering a smorgasbord of all this stuff, moving into expensive premium series that you can go binge on in one day? And you know, a big part of the answer is that it puts them top of mind. It's an HBO strategy where a lot of people get the whole cable bundle because they want an HBO show, starting with The Sopranos. And so I think Yahoo News has a massive platform, and we can do more and better things. Yahoo Sports has actually done some of this for quite a few years. And you know, we were so strong in Yahoo News with the model of, technically we license AP, don't aggregate, but with aggregation, licensing, and everything else, that we didn't really have to do that to build a strong position. But we feel that actually It's very important to do it more. We've had a start at it. We'll be doing much more of it in the near future, and we'll be using all the technology at Yahoo's disposal to make the storytelling at least as interesting as anything you'll find anywhere else. And actually, we hope to partner with a lot of news organizations to bring that technology to bear on what they do.
Rob, back here.
Oh.
Could you talk about the acquisition of, is it called Summly?
Yes.
The automated summarization of news for mobile platforms. What about summarization? I guess the broad question, mobile, and then technology like your Summly acquisition. Where are you going in mobile?
Yeah, I'm glad to. And in fact, I'm working very closely with Nick D'Aloisio, who is the founder of Summly and a really extraordinary guy, and still 17, I think. Everybody wanted to know, did he really build all this? And he's really, really amazing and really gifted. A couple of things. One is that Yahoo is now, everybody says mobile first. We don't do anything that can't run on mobile as well. It's interesting where that hit in infographics and other things that are essentially journalistic product. And we might launch something that works on desktop. If it doesn't work on mobile, then we don't want to launch it. So it raises the bar so that all the interactive things that add a lot of deep value have to work on a smartphone as well as desktop as well as something else, because otherwise it won't make sense to someone, because the consumption has shifted and is shifting to mobile, obviously. So you've seen a lot, Yahoo's launched a lot of, when Marissa came, she had a joke, I think no one realized it, that Yahoo had more apps than mobile engineers. And that was a year ago. And now there are hundreds of people, a lot of them who came through acqui-hires, in this incredible mobile factory just churning out things. And one of those acqui-hires was Summly, and Nick was one of those people. So it's very interesting to work with him. We're in a room, and he's there with producers that work for me and coming up with all these use cases on how do we do this and that. The summarization technology is really good and really powerful. It's actually in the main Yahoo app right now. It was integrated within a month of buying that company. And one of the things that I think is really interesting out of Summly is if you hit quality in summarization, it frees you up to do the original content and the things that machines can't do. So while it might seem very threatening to have algorithms do all these things that we all used to do, Yahoo had people who process things, who did production, who cropped photos all the time. And what we really want to do is do interactive things that can be deep, that were never done before. We want to do original reporting. We want to do impactful reporting with social packaging, things that are shareable and important. And the more technologies like Nick's technology surrounds everything we do so that you can go get all the content, all the wires, everything, and it's relevant to you, then I can invest in human capital to do the higher brain function things, which is really what we want to do. I will never have a 1,200-person newsroom like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. I would like to have relationships with those. I'd like to have, and we do, a team doing original things, but I don't want to have people doing rote work.
Over here. This is a question from way out of left field, but I'm thinking about your own career path and Nando, and it seems like along the way you've disrupted yourself any number of times, and I'm thinking, what would have happened with him if he had stayed at Nando, and where would he be today? What can you tell people about how you manage yourself and your own path through all this stuff, and then maybe some ideas for RJI in terms of what might it uniquely contribute to this world that you live in?
Yeah, well, all by accident, probably, like with many people. But, well, I think about that, actually, because I didn't, there was no big plan, and I feel like I could almost be doing any number of things now. But what actually happened was I was a beat reporter at the Raleigh News and Observer, which was just one of the great papers that invested in young reporters. We did all this great stuff. It was actually pre-McClatchy then, although it didn't change all that much. And it still had the Raleigh Times, which was the afternoon paper where you could write these little New Yorker-like pieces about the, all this stuff. It was great. And you could have impact, and but the reason that I ended up getting into interactive, other than just general intellectual curiosity, was that I actually almost went to the LA Times as a print reporter in the early 90s. And I ended up going back there as the digital general manager a decade later. In between, I went to public policy grad school because there were certain areas I was interested in and I could really drill down. But I intended to go back into a news organization, and I had an offer at Time Magazine to either start the website with a guy named Jim Kinsella or go to one of the bureaus. And I asked a lot of people what to do because I wanted to work at Time Magazine. And the advice I got was stick close to the mothership, there's more opportunity there. But the other thing that got me is that we were running all the news on AOL then, and my job was to be a shadow managing editor or a shadow chief of correspondence, which hierarchy-wise was kind of a joke in that place, where that you'd have all these editors editing everything, and then I would be calling up the bureau chiefs. I would see this amazing river of stuff come in that would all go to Friday night, and nobody would see 90% of it, and it was great, and these reporters broke things on a Tuesday that would then not see the light of day. So I did two things, and there was another guy named Mark Coatney who ended up going to Tumblr and just left there recently. And we would say, hey, you've got this amazing thing on a Tuesday, let's break it, we'll give it to the New York Times with your attribution, and then we would spend 9 hours telling them how to do AOL dial-up. And then you make friends, and so we built this thing through social capital, and it ran on AOL, it ran on CompuServe, we were sort of the primary news provider there. But the real reason I stuck with this, and the reason I ended up moving to the business side, is that I wanted a little more control, and with the news hole and interactive, you're not filling a static news hole, which my only ambition was to write the best lead ever or something like that. This was, it's interdisciplinary, you needed to create the form constantly, and we still are. And to that, you know, is the product manager in charge these days at a place like Yahoo? Is the editor in charge? Anybody can be in charge and everybody thinks they're in charge. And I've learned to respect what product managers who know things I don't know, and that's most of them, do. And they have decision rights at Yahoo and at tech companies on a lot of things. But if we don't collaborate, we end up with things that don't have the right way to treat breaking news, et cetera. So when we do collaborate, everybody benefits and there's a lot of mutual respect. But we share responsibility. I'm on the business side now. I find it very rewarding, but it's mainly because I wanted to engage in what content deals we do, how do we hire. I have an economic rationale, this kind of stuff. I literally have a business chart based on social news sourcing that allows me to hire more reporters and curators.
I have a question related to Patch. Curious in terms of what are some of the lessons you guys have taken from Patch and things that you will or will not do, and what are you guys thinking about in terms of a local play?
That local's really hard. I spend a lot of time in local places, and it's sort of another passion area. I kind of, and when I was at the LA Times, we did some experiments with click and mortar, meaning taking the local newspapers that were part of the Tribune world and where there was a newspaper building a web operation, but really where there was no newspaper in towns like that, launching a website. And interestingly, if you get enough traction, then launch a print product, because that's where the dollars really still are. And that bespeaks the Warren Buffett model a little bit. There isn't a substitute as much. But Patch was the example where I thought it might scale. And for me, the issue was advertising. It's very hard to do local sales. If you can get regional and national buyers to come in with a very few deals and be the business model for a Patch, then you've really solved a problem. And I think I was really hoping that AOL could do that, just for the sake of journalism in the industry. And I think they're fine. I give all of them, Tim Armstrong and John Broad, a lot of credit for trying to do this. For all that someone may or may not like Patch versus the local newspaper, the Patch in South Pasadena, where I live in California, is better than the local newspaper, to be honest, just because one great person was there. I don't know if they're still working there. So they might have overinvested, and they're finding an equilibrium, and it might or might not succeed. The real question is, can you have ad sales if it's advertising supported and do it regionally and nationally? And I don't think anybody's solved that yet. But things can thrive locally still.
Rob, I found the article about Megan Lieberman yesterday on your Yahoo News Tumblr, and I was wondering what your plans are for news within the blog environment and within Tumblr.
Thanks for that question. I think that the plans are big. We clearly, one of the things that I think we thought a lot about with Tumblr is that Tumblr is actually very strong where Yahoo has been weak and vice versa. And this is a line from my CEO too. Yahoo has had strength in news, sports, and finance, and Tumblr has a lot of content in arts, fashion, other things. You know, it's, of course, it's social content, so there's incredible stuff, there's random stuff, but there's huge depth there and breadth. For us, there's a lot of possibility in building out. It's a great platform to do more, though, in these areas like news and sports and finance, because there's an interest graph you can build. Tumblr is an interest graph. One of the big decisions, the biggest decision David made, I think, was to have reblogging as opposed to comments, so that it's very easy. You can have a Tumblr and not create any content, and that just really made things take off. You can create it, but on most platforms, right, it's only a small number of people creating and the rest are sharing. So he made it really about sharing, and he made it very visual. We have done some trials already in Yahoo Finance, which to me was an easier example than Yahoo News, where we have this great brand. Yahoo Finance was the first free information product out there. Hasn't even changed that much in recent years, but it just is, it's a passion brand for people on Wall Street. And there are pockets of, there are brokers, there are investors, there are bankers, they all go to Yahoo Finance to get quotes, and not everybody has Bloomberg. So we're building out an interest graph of, we just hired a guy named Phil Perlman from a startup called StockTwits. Anybody seen that? Who's really a great community guy. And we're reaching out to build up communities for Yahoo Finance of all these experts and journalists out there in a way that I think no one else has the brand to do. And that's going to take a lot of work. And we're doing it on Tumblr because it's easy. And I expect a lot more of that to happen. And you'll see the lines start to blur, and we'll have a lot of cross-linking, but that's a higher level product strategy that you know, a lot of other folks than I will figure out.
I'm interested in point 4 there. I understand, I get it that voice would be an advantage. People go to a news organization with a certain voice. Like habit is obvious, but verification seems to be less obvious that that will be an advantage. How do audiences know that you verify? How does that become part of it?
It's a fair question. I mean, one, the first answer that leaps to mind is that they might not know, but they generally trust you over time. So if we were to take a user-generated clip of a suspect in a bombing who turned out not to be, or there was no basis for that, then we would have a trust issue with our users, and that would get around fast, as it did with Reddit.
So that one has to build over time, one way or the other. And if you burn them, then you've lost it.
Yeah, and the same as with the corporations. I mean, people know, people are wise to that sort of thing. So while we might do more of this and we might promote ourselves as being that, I don't necessarily expect that we will. I expect that if it's a choice of having nothing on Syria, and the AP, for example, I don't mean to single out the AP, wire services had nothing on Syria in this window when there was lots of social content. So who's going in there and doing that? The AP is working on this, they're verifying as well. Reuters is doing it, we're all doing it. But whoever makes the first big mistake is going to give it a real bad name. So there's a lot of risk in this. So we really, that's why having, as we say in sort of tech companies, domain experts like David Clinch at Storyful, it really matters. Similarly, I didn't mean to take a left turn, but we partnered with SCOTUS blog on the Obama healthcare verdict, the one that famously got some wrong reports. I didn't have anyone on staff that was going to parse a 300-page document in 5 minutes, but SCOTUS blog could, so we felt enough trust in their track record to take their interpretation, attribute it to them, and make it a Yahoo News story. And this other stuff, I think, is intellectually similar.
Rob, you mentioned about the journalists, so you're looking to hire. You said journalists with high social aptitude and journalistic chops. I'm curious if you could, talk. First of all, I appreciate the fact that it isn't just sort of like we want that, like journalists who can code. That you're actually talking about some sort of human skills here as well. But could you talk about, since we're talking about 2018, what are the skills, experiences, and opportunities that journalism schools and news organizations need to be providing for the aspiring journalists so that Yahoo will hire them in 2018 when they graduate?
Well, I mean, the answer used to be everything and code and do HTML and all that. And while that, I think you have to be fluid in technology, I'm actually going to start to say the opposite a little bit. At Yahoo or at other technology companies, I think the comfort, and I won't even say at Yahoo. I just think in the arenas that I'm in and have been in, engineers want to code. Sure, they can collaborate. You've got a lot of amazing people in the industry. And the New York Times has been great at this, in particular, who do infographics and interactives. But I think what we really are looking for are people that have the sensibility to create, report, and curate that know things that an engineer might not. Because if I mean, it's amazing to have someone who can code and do all their own stuff and be a designer, and in many news organizations, you're going to have to do all that. If you're getting to a bigger place like Yahoo, you've got a lot of people to code, but they don't know how to package the news, what the best breaking news treatment is. They might, and the ideas are great and they're welcome and anyone can think of the best idea. But people like to say, let's bring together a team of experts or people who are on a learning curve and let them do their thing. So I'm particularly looking, Megan Lieberman, whom I hired, it doesn't know how to code, I think. She's done a lot of stuff, though. She's had to figure out video at the New York Times with no big resources. She had to be very comfortable in working with all different kinds of people had been at the Times 13 years, and then she became the person who's developing things with Nate Silver, and a lot of other things too. But there's no substitute for the kinds of things that she knows, and pairing her with product leads in engineering is a really powerful combination. So we definitely want people like Megan and people that can, I think the difference is if you look at a lot of who's doing well on all these platforms in reporting, people like, there's Andrew Kaczynski, who I referenced in that slide, natively social. People don't just wait to be published and then go home. You're on this constant cycle, all that stuff. You're really running a conversation. And this, I think, started with HuffPost and everything else. You're constantly seen as the expert or the host or the person running point on a conversation with the audience from when you wake up until you go to sleep or beyond. And that means you have to know your subject matter, and you also have to know how to post it and do all this stuff really fast. That doesn't mean you have to code. It just means you have to use the tools that are available the same way that people have always used the tools that were available. Interestingly, but I don't think we would hire someone who couldn't do that, but there are people at the New York Times who've been print reporters who are really good at that. The best people tend to be able to just do it all, but it is not a technical skill set. It's an open-mindedness and it's a metabolism thing.
So that's what you mean by social aptitude, what you just described there.
Right.
Running the conversation.
Rob, this is a Yahoo Finance question. Yahoo Finance is clearly an important part of Yahoo. Marissa Mayer referenced it in your most recent conference call, as did your investor relations. It's a big part of your traffic numbers that helped you surpass Google and non-search traffic. But you really haven't done a lot to it. You did reference that you want to add some more communities to it. I have a competition question. Who is your competitors that you're worried about in terms of Yahoo Finance? There's a lot of people in the business space. And what can you learn from people like Dan Roth and what he's doing at LinkedIn?
Well, I'll start taking those questions backwards so I can remember them all. I mean, I think the LinkedIn project and what Dan has done is amazing and great. I think that there are a couple pieces of Yahoo Finance as a business or as even an editorial organization. I don't know can't really separate it. It's a traditional media business where we have a newsroom, we have an editor named Aaron Task. It's been very strong in video, actually. We have the 2 top-rated daily finance talk shows anywhere, including TV. We still have a partnership with CNBC, but we actually get really, really big numbers on those shows. And we have an editor who can pivot and do all those things. And we've hired people from traditional media like Michael Santoli from Dow Jones, who is great on all platforms, and we put him on CNBC too. So we have that kind of operation. There's a lot of content. It's not a big staff. It's a good media business. But its real claim to fame is that it's a free information product. And so in a way, it's been in a position of strength. And you will see, and I think Marissa has mentioned this, you will see changes to the site soon. It functions perfectly well. One of the things we try to do is there's so many opportunities with a property like this. It's a major entity. It's in its own class in some ways. I mean, there are other parts of the ecosystem. There are the Bloombergs, there are media companies. The traffic to Yahoo Finance, though, combining everything, is still about double what it is to all these business media entities online, the Journal, et cetera, much bigger. But we have to remember that it's driven by utility in large part, and we're really doubling down on those kinds of things. So you'll see a lot of changes to Yahoo Finance this year. I think building on our strengths. I can't, unfortunately. That's one of the things what we do now is, especially on product launches and things, we launch when we launch. We improve, but there's a huge focus on this, and it's absolutely a priority at Yahoo to do much more with it.
Rob, I've got a question for you about the next presidential election cycle. So broadly, how are you thinking about applying your tools and vision toward making that coverage distinctive? And then the second one has to do with a lot of things that are very close to us as journalists, which is how do you enliven policy distinctions and debates during that process, and what opportunities are there in your environment?
It's what don't we want to do? I think we did a lot in the last election cycle that was new for Yahoo, and it wasn't a tenth of what I think we really wanted to do, but it was still a lot. The big question for me is where the product innovation comes in line with the journalism. We have such scale that if I were in a smaller newsroom, even a top brand but smaller, or maybe a bigger newsroom but smaller in tech, I would focus on a lot of interactive features that might be highly shareable, and I think we all want to do things like that. I tend to be interested in deep structural things, and so one of the models for me in the last election cycle, and this is the piece that well, I'll tell you what we did do and then what we didn't do. What we did do is that we had a new partnership with ABC News where we had the ability to do things online and on air. We had access to the audience in times that ABC News didn't have. We had access for a lot of airtime with them for the elections. We had access to their journalists. So at the conventions and on election night, we partnered, and our White House correspondent sat with Diane Sawyer interviewing the campaign managers. We did events there. And for us, this was all very new. It did very well in terms of audience. We also did another thing called Control Room that had live video feeds we switched among. It had social content. We actually worked with Storify on that. We had journalists from a number of news organizations joining live chats while the video was going on. We had more traffic to that on election night. I think I mentioned this to some people earlier here, than anybody else. We didn't really promote that fact heavily. But I'll tell you, we had, at that point, 10 million concurrent streams, which was many multiples of what the next competitor did. So for ABC News, this was great because it was like having a cable channel or better where you can reach everybody. About 95% of all US adult internet users got political content from Yahoo every week, I think. So we don't have the positioning of Politico, which is great and has a lot of insider positioning, but in terms of where people found political news, we're a major source, if not the major source. So we did a lot of events like that. We did a lot of live events. We hit the trail. We used Flickr and other tools around the Iowa caucuses. We had people send in pictures of what the candidates should see and know about Iowa in documentary style. The difference for me is that now we've invested in Flickr as a product in a major way, and we're doing other investments. And that's one of Marissa's big focuses. So we try to use these products systematically. So for me, I'd like to go from one-offs and nice collaboration to something much more structural and systematic. And a good model for that, for me, intentional or not, was the 2008 cycle with Huffington Post. Because I remember when people were saying it's all about a big squawk box for the election cycle and politics, and at the end of that cycle, it'll fall into the ocean and there won't be a business there. There won't be a media entity there. And they very shrewdly started creating other verticals, and they used that group blog model in many other ways that they hadn't even, and really sustained that as an entity. For all the things people like about it and don't like about it, they leveraged the election cycle to create a new permanent platform experience for people. And that's the kind of thing that I think we can do. We did another project in the election cycle where we had, we followed 12 American families who had just effectively slipped out of the middle class because they lost their home, or it was one event away. They were rolling a little too high in the real estate market, and we had the audience follow them. We did it somewhat controversially, reality style. We didn't let the audience vote on what they did, but that we said, should they, should the person walk away from their house? Should they do this? Should they do that? And the reason for that is that these were kitchen table issues. They weren't what did the candidates say, but these were the things people were really thinking about. And we got a tremendous response, especially on a local basis, to that. At the end of the day, though, I would like to see a debate, discussion, and solutions platform to coincide with the debate among the candidates. And Yahoo has a very unique asset, which is the ability to reach almost everybody locally and globally. And do it in a programmed way as opposed to it's a social platform and people may or may not get it.
Say a little bit more about this, like being interactive.
For example, we did not have a platform to generate policy solutions to the questions of the day, but we did have the ability to convene a discussion with 10 million single head of household moms. So tying that into matters of import in a way that's accessible to and interesting to people, that requires product development, that requires a collaboration of great engineering, great product talent. It requires the business investment to do things like that. And I think it requires more than comments on a page. But there are any number of things that will happen in the company, but the opportunity to engage the audience is there. And it starts with the foundation, and this is Yahoo's core positioning now. We actually own a lot of the daily habits. This is something Marissa has said. People come and they check news headlines, they check stock quotes. So there's a tremendous opportunity to build on that behavior and do more and get into these deeper areas. And someone like Megan Lieberman coming in, who's been at the New York Times, is now going to have to think about, what do I do with that? How do I play with that, and how do I take that trust or that habit and do something with it that I might not do at the New York Times?
Do we have one more question from somebody? Wow, that's amazing. For this room. Rob, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.